Was he coming in my house? This happened in the early 90s, when I was a junior in high school, 16 years old female, and was home on Christmas break. It was in the middle of a weekday, and I was home alone when the phone rang. When I answered, a man asked for me by my first and last name. He then said, "This is Randy, from company, and I was calling to..." It was unintelligible. I tried to interrupt to have him repeat his name and company, because he said it very quickly and unclearly, but he ignored my question and asked me if I had been looking for a job. I wasn't, but I was young and sort of wanted to see what the job was going to be, so I hedged a bit. Randy then told me that he was hiring models for commercials, and that someone had given him my name. I literally laughed, because 1, that sounded completely fake, and 2, I wasn't exactly swimming in model contracts. When I told him that I believed he must be mistaken, he replied, "No, I think you're very pretty, Tessa." While that comment may not seem that disturbing, it stopped me in my tracks. He had initially said that I'd been recommended to him, but now he was speaking as if he'd seen me. At that moment, I just knew in my gut that something was very, very wrong. Unfortunately, I had not yet learned to get my brain and my gut on the same page, so while I wasn't buying any of what he was selling, in order to be polite, and maybe just in case there was some cash and an ego boost to be had, I said, "Okay, how about you just leave your number, and I'll talk to my parents and get back to you." I knew if he was legit, he'd have no problem giving me his number. Also, my brother had been asked to do a commercial or a print ad or something a few years before, and I knew that my parents had to sign some forms because he was underage. Of course, Randy failed both of my tests and resisted giving me his number or allowing me time to talk to my parents. He encouraged me to just agree right then, so I promptly said, "No thank you," and hung up. Within seconds of hanging up, the phone rang again. When I answered, I'll never forget the first thing Randy said. "Do you give blowjobs with your eyes open or closed?" That escalated quickly. As I stood in stunned silence, he repeated that question, and then moved on to similar ones. What made it unnerving, besides the obvious, was that it didn't sound like a prank call at all. Even though his comments were sexual, he sounded angry. I was safe in my home, and it was just a phone call, but it made me feel like I was in danger. I hung up, of course, but he called continuously, so continuously, in fact, that every time I tried to pick up the phone to call my mom, he would either be on the line when I picked up the phone, or the phone would be ringing again. By this point, I wasn't answering the phone, and if he was on the line when I picked it up, I would hang up quickly, but he was getting angrier and angrier, and his comments were taking a darker turn. What started as asking me invasive sexual questions had turned into comments about how he'd like to harm me. I was finally able to get through to my mom, and she called the police. They didn't seem to take it super seriously, or act like they could even do much. I didn't recognize his voice, and it wasn't a teenager. It was obviously a grown-ass man. They felt that it was just someone messing with me, and that it would just fade out on its own, and for a time, it seemed like they were right. That first day, he called constantly a few more hours, but then the call stopped, and although it was very disturbing, it seemed to be over. Some time passed, and I quit thinking about it. But then spring break rolled around. It was the same scenario as before. I was home from school on a weekday and was alone. The phone rang, and when I answered, he launched straight into the vile sexual talk. I hung up, and we began the same cycle as before, with him calling constantly, and me trying to time it just right so I could pick up the phone between calls and call my mom. Every time I hung up on him, he got angrier, and the things he said became more foul. This time, he started reciting my address and talking about paying me a visit. Not only did it feel very threatening, but it was so confusing. Who in the world was doing this? Why would a grown man I didn't know make these calls? Not just once, but two times months apart. How did he have so much information about me? None of it made any sense. When I was finally able to call my mom, she called the police again, and the officer took it a bit more seriously. They asked if we wanted to put a tap on the phone. We agreed, and they told us that the process is as follows. It would take 24 hours to get with the phone company and get it active. Once active, it would be there for 60 days. If there was no issue in 60 days, it would be removed. But if there were issues, then we'd have him. I was a teenager who wasn't speaking to the police directly, so I never understood the ins and the outs of this. Were they taping all of our calls? Did they just listen for them if something happened? Were they just tracing who the calls were from? As I'm sure you can imagine, as a kid who just turned 17, I really wanted to know if the people could hear my calls. But my mom didn't really ask those questions. She said they told her that once the tap was on, to let them know if we got any more calls. So she didn't ask any more than that. Just like before, the calls continued throughout the afternoon, but had stopped by the time my parents got home. I got some the next morning after my parents had left for work, but by the time the 24 window had passed, they had stopped. And once again, things were quiet another few months. This cycle continued over the course of the next year. It was quiet until midsummer, then again until Christmas break of my senior year, and when he called, the pattern was almost always the same. The call started out with him being a bit more polite, but as soon as I recognized his voice and hung up, they became progressively more angry and violent. They always came when I was alone, and began continuing until the exact moment that my mom or dad pulled into the driveway. We would put the tap back on the phone each time, but the calls never continued for more than 24 hours in a stretch, and there was always at least 60 days in between episodes. The content of the calls, however, got increasingly more personal. He would regularly mention my address. I know you live at 11A Charter Street. I'm gonna pay a visit to 11A Charter, and eventually began talking about my clothing. You look so pretty in that blue striped shirt. But then, he started mentioning things that I owned, but didn't really wear. When are you going to wear that red dress with the little white flowers? This obviously took our level of fear up a notch. By this point, because he would call right up until someone else got home, we knew he had to be in a position to see our driveway. But every day after school, I would let myself in the side door using a key that was hidden outside. It was extremely well hidden, and you had to be positioned in just the right spot to ever see me get inside. But if you were hiding and watching, then it was possible. It became impossible not to think he may have been in our house, in my room, and that thought was simply unbearable. We obviously stopped leaving a key outside, but the very nature of the cycle, short bursts of intense contact, followed by months of nothing, made it hard to know what to do. He clearly knew how to avoid the trace. He was motivated enough to keep contacting me over such a long period of time, and he was controlled enough for me to wait long stretches in between calls. I'd never been someone who scared easily, and my dad didn't want me to lose that. He started keeping the guns in the house loaded and taking me to the shooting range. After Christmas, a quiet few months passed, and as always, I had stayed alert for a week or two, then quit thinking about it. On the first day of my spring break, I was home and in a great mood when the phone rang. Expecting a call from my best friend, I said, "Hello?" and heard, "I'm calling about the job you applied for. This is Randy from my company." I actually have been applying for jobs, but as I said from where, it hit me that this was the exact same conversation we had the first time he called. I hung up and prepared myself for another awful day. The calls just kept coming, and as usual, in the process of trying to call my mom, I would end up on the phone with him. The things he would say got worse after every quiet spell, and by this time, he was describing how he was going to violate and murder me. More than the things he was saying, the rage in his voice triggered a real fear in me. I was having trouble getting the line open long enough to call my mom, and I knew he was close enough to be watching the house. I got the gun out of the closet, and I sat there by the ringing phone, wanting to call my mom, but not wanting a chance to hear his voice again. I wasn't panicky, but I was crying and definitely scared. But then, I was done, just simply fucking done. I picked up the phone, and he launched into a sick spiel, trying to get as much in as he could before I hung up again. But I didn't hang up. I'm not sure why. I had no plan, but I sat there silently for a few minutes and just let him talk. And when he said that he could be at my house in less than 2 minutes, without thinking about it for a second, I said, "Come on over." The door's open. I then hung up the phone, walked over and unlocked and opened the front door, leaving just the screen door closed. With the gun in hand, I sat down on the couch facing the door and waited. He never came, and he never called again. There is zero doubt in my mind that if he had walked on that porch, I would have shot him, without fucking hesitation. I still have no idea who it was, although there are a limited number of people it could be. or why, or whether it would have ever escalated beyond phone calls. I went off to college, and my parents eventually moved out of that house, so I suppose it'll be forever a mystery. I trust that God will give him what he deserves, but I definitely learned that people who feed off your fear disappear quickly when you quit being afraid. Picked up a very strange call at my work. This happened a few months ago in October. I work in a cosmetics store and manage the registers. Part of my job includes answering the phones. So, we get a phone call, and of course I answer. The caller claimed to be a male to female trans, and was curious about how they can use skincare and makeup to help them with their transition. I've worked with many people that are transitioning, and was glad to help them. I started talking to them about what kind of service they can receive, and recommending products and whatnot. Then it got a little strange. They told me what the hormones they were taking caused their teeth to get really sharp, and due to this, the caller was not only transitioning to be a woman, but also a vampire. At this point, I realized that either this person is a prank caller, or they need some serious mental help. I didn't want to just hang up, just in case they did need some sort of help. So I decided to grab a manager and let them see how to deal with the situation. What they said to the manager was seriously disgusting and disturbing. Apparently, the caller told the manager that they were having a hard time finding humans to feed off of, but they were thinking the next best thing for them was to drink their teenage daughter's menstrual blood. They even specified that it would be best if they could drink straight from the source. It was at this point that my manager informed the client that due to their comments, they would not be able to accept their business, and if they call back again, the police would be brought into it. I have no idea if my manager reported it to the police. It was close to Halloween, so I think most people assumed it was just a really weird prank call. I've been instructed to hang up and call the police immediately if the client ever calls back, or if they try to enter the store, not that I even know what would they look like. So, creepy caller, let's not meet. Sinister stalkers. When I was 12 years old, we lived in a semi-rural area that was about 10 minutes drive from the closest little town. All of the properties around us were acreage, so we didn't have any neighbors close to us. My mom was a single mom, so it was just my mom, my younger brother, me, and our bull Mastiff ex-dog living in a kind of isolated little house. We all loved where we lived, and the isolation was one of the best things about it. One night, my mom decided to treat herself and take the time for a relaxing bath instead of a shower. Being a super busy single mom, this rarely ever happened. Because her house was little, the laundry, shower bath, and a toilet were all in the same room. I knocked on the door and called out to my mom that I was coming inside to go to the toilet. As I opened the door, I see a man standing at the window above the bath, watching my mom. He looked like a bad version of a horror movie clown, minus the makeup. He was maybe 50 years old with a big bald spot on top and straggly thin hair around the bottom. As soon as he saw me, he sort of ducked before moving quickly out of view. I started screaming to my mom that there was a man at the window, and I swear to God, I didn't know a human could move so quick. She was instantly out of the bath wrapped in a towel and grabbing me and my little brother to lock us all in my bedroom. We called the police and waited terrified because we didn't know if he was still around. After what felt like forever, we heard our dog barking and an engine revving. This was even more horrific because we didn't know if it was the guy who had come back with his truck. If it was the police, they would put a siren on or something, right? My mom eventually decided that she had to go out and check. I'd been experimenting with cutting my hair that day, so I sent her out of my room armed with a pair of scissors and a hairbrush. No, it wasn't the man. It was the idiot police, who were scared to get out of the car because of our dog, so they decided to rev the engine to let us know they were there. In the end, they just made a report, had a look around our house to see if there were footprints, and then left. So, we also left that night. and stayed at a friend's for a few nights. When we returned to the house a few days later, we had a message on our answering machine. All it said, in a really creepy voice, was, "I kicked your dog." We called the police again, because they had told us on the first night that our dog had obviously been intimidated somehow by the guy, because she hadn't barked at him, although she would normally bark at anyone when they first got to our house. They said they would trace the call and get back to us. 3 months later, I had broken my foot the day before, so I was hobbling around on crutches when I heard my brother screaming from the bathroom. We had a big piece of fabric pinned up over the bathroom window while we got new curtains made, but it had been gapping in the breeze. While my brother was in the shower, he had seen the shape of a face in the little gap between the fabric, and had leant forward to move the fabric, only to come face to face with a different man. As soon as he screamed, my mom turned into Supermom, who we wouldn't want to mess with, and ran out the house with a knife. I was screaming and hopping around on one leg with my crutches, panicking that my mom and brother could run away, but I'd be left with this perceived psycho killer. Sadly, he managed to get away before my mom could see him and cut his dick off. Again, we called the police, and they came to make a report, but this time, they decided my brother and I should do a confit. Pretty sure that's what they called it, but essentially it's where you make a mugshot of the person by choosing the features from a book of different eyes, noses, etc. When we had finished, the officers looked at us seriously and said they knew who we had identified. The first one who I saw was a convicted murderer who had only been released from jail a couple of months earlier. Turns out he used to live on the property that backed onto ours, but because he had a big property, it was about 5 acres away. He used to watch his neighbor's wife when she was in the shower, so the husband went to confront him about it, and was shot dead on the driveway. For some fucked up reason, he had only got 5 years. The second, who my brother had seen, turned out to be a sexual deviant and pedophile. He was a guy in his early 20s, the son of a high-profile family in the area, and well known for watching people and children in the bath. The police didn't do anything with our cases, and we sold the house and moved away. We never spent another night in that house. A few months later, a news story appeared in the paper. The younger one had been arrested with over 600 left shoes in the trunk of his car. Apparently that was his fetish, and he kept them as trophies. By the way, the creepy phone call? The police traced the call and found out a kid a year older than me had picked the wrong night to make prank calls, as he got a visit from the cops. The cops told us his name, and I strangely actually did meet him a couple years later. But to the murderer and the pedophile, let's not meet. Can I come over and play? This creepy encounter happened to me over a decade ago, and it's one of those things that scared you so bad that you tried to make yourself forget about it so much that it kinda actually worked. The only reason I remembered it was, I'm sure you already guessed, from reading all the other posts on the subreddit. P.S. It's kinda really long, so if you don't want it, just skip it. I believe I was in the 5th grade, which meant for me 11 years old at the time. About 2 years before this, my mom had moved into a new house, the one I was living in at the time that this incident had happened. The house we moved into was only about a 15-minute walk to and from school, so because of this, my mom would allow me to walk home from school every single day and stay at home by myself for the rest of the day until she got home from work. I got home from school around 2:30 every day, and she would usually be home from work in between 5 or 6 o'clock. So, me being so young, I thought it was awesome to be trusted to be home alone without a babysitter, and honestly, for a while there it was. I was always trying to be more grown up, so I wouldn't be scared to pick up the phone. At this time, very few private residences has caller ID. Maybe a few people did, but it was mostly only companies like the ones my parents worked for. One day, after I got home from school, I'm in the middle of doing whatever it was that I did back then, and the phone rings. And just like I always did, I answered it. A man answers on the other end. Hello? Is this the Smith residence? This was basically the response I had always received when I answered the phone. My parents were very well known in their business, and many times had clients calling the house that I had to give a different phone number so they could speak to them. I answered, yes, this is. Hello, is John Smith there? Can I speak with him? The man asked, looking for my dad. This was already strange, because my parents had been separated and hadn't lived together for almost 10 years, and as I mentioned before, this was my mom's house. However, me being young and trusting, I knew my mom and dad worked in the same business, and my mom still had my dad's last name, so I didn't think too much about it. So I answered, no, he's at work. Okay, what about your mom, is she there? He asked. I remember he never did say my mom's name. My mom, of course, was at work too, so I said, no, she's at work right now too. Now, I know already how stupid I sounded. I just told a total stranger I was home all by myself, but it hadn't sounded that way to me, because I'd encountered phone calls like this one every single day and they just usually end there. But this one didn't. Oh, okay, that's fine. I actually work with your dad, John, and I just had to ask him a few things about what we're working on. Who is this? The stranger asked. I'm his daughter, Sarah, I answered. Oh yeah, you know Sarah. You probably met me already because I know your dad very well. I'm actually supposed to come over to meet your dad to talk about work stuff, the creeper said. At this point, the man's demeanor and voice was slowly starting to sound a little less trusting. I think at some point, I stupidly told this man that my dad didn't actually live in this house. He said something like, oh, so you're at your mom's house. That's okay, I know her too. The whole time I'm just standing there, feeling slightly uncomfortable, but I still couldn't figure out why. Your dad really needs to come over so we can take care of some stuff for work, so I'm just gonna get over there right now, okay? He says like it was no big deal. I know he knew exactly what I was going to do when he said that, and he played me right into this messed up game. No, you can't, they're still at work, my dumbass said. This is where he completely flips off his normal businessman facade and starts sounding like he's already looking at some kind of child pornography while he's talking to me. Oh, really? So you're at home all by yourself? That's okay, he slithers. No, my mom really wouldn't be okay with that, I said shakily. But it's okay because I know your parents. They gave me the address. This is the correct address, right? He knowingly asks. 2323 Crawford Street. I'm thinking, oh my god. He knows where I live. What am I gonna do? I'm just so scared at this point that I actually answer with, I guess. So, since your parents aren't home, can I come over and play? He asked me in the scariest voice I honestly believe I will ever hear. Surprisingly, I actually was able to get out, no. But Sarah, why not? I want to come over and play with you. I've seen you before. I know you're a very pretty girl. Why don't you want to play with me? He sounded like he had asked with a malicious smile on his face. Because I don't know you. You're a stranger. I finally said this one smart thing. But I know you. How long before your parents get home? No. That's all I could think of to say. Why not? Because I don't want you to. I could barely get that out. I was so scared. You don't have to be scared. I just want to come over and play with you. I just couldn't answer him anymore. The sinking feeling in my chest felt so deep. It felt like I was holding down my own voice. I think my parents will be home soon, I managed to say. That's okay. I can call you tomorrow then, he said. I still couldn't say anything back. I'll call you tomorrow, Sarah. Then I can come over and play. All I could do was hang the fuck up. The rest of that night, I spent as far away from all the windows as I could get. Someone must have been watching over me. Because my mom never got off early. But not at night. She ended up getting home only 15 minutes after the phone call. I asked if she was meeting any new clients soon, and she said no. I called my dad and asked if he was meeting any new clients, and he said no as well. I never was able to tell them about it. I knew I handled it badly, and I didn't want them to know I did because I knew they thought I was smarter than that. The next day, I wasn't at my mom's house at all, even if there were people there. I didn't want to run the risk of having to hear that man's voice again, even if my mom was there with me. After that, I never answered the phone until I heard the person leave a message on the machine again. I never walked home alone again, and I used every excuse I could to get out of being in the house all by myself. About a week later, my mom started telling me at least once every 2 weeks that a grown man would call asking for me, but would never say why. She never got suspicious, because she always thought it was one of my older cousins playing a prank. A few months went by and I went down to him calling only once a month. After about a year, caller ID became popular, and finally, I didn't hear my mom telling me he called. Even so, I still never answered a call that said private caller on the ID screen. Pervert calling, pooped instead. I was reading through the subreddit and came across a story that reminded me of a vaguely similar experience that I had, so I thought I would share it. This is J.A. It was the summer before I turned 19 years old. I had just gotten out of a very abusive relationship and was living with my sister and her kids, helping them out financially as well as giving me a place to stay. We lived in a big college town, so where there were plenty of assholes. It was a typical night at our place. We had a couple friends over and were watching movies. At some point, the phone rang with unknown on the caller ID and my sister answered. The person on the other end asked me for my name, so I assumed it was one of my friends. So after she handed me the phone, I obviously said hello. It was some guy clarifying that I was indeed who he was looking for, and even went as far as to make sure I had the correct hair color. I was a little creeped out, but I was just assuming it was one of my friends being a dick. So I kept asking if it was different people, and he kept telling me that who he wasn't important. Finally, I wasn't amused anymore, and asked what was important then. He responded with, "The only thing that's important is what you're going to do for me, so I don't kill every single person in your house." I felt my stomach drop and was instantly terrified. My sister could tell something was wrong and started getting pissed off, saying, "What the fuck is going on? Who the fuck is that? Hang up the fucking phone now." The guy on the phone didn't like her shouting in the background, so he told me to go to a more private room, or she would die first, and it would be a slow, painful death. I just stood there for a few minutes, frozen with fear. He then told me that there were motion sensors planted under the floorboards of our house, so he could tell if I was moving or not. Author's note: thinking about that now, it's fucking idiotic. However, in the moment, I was so terrified that my loved ones would be hurt that I wasn't willing to risk that if it was just this guy being a douche nozzle. So, I went to the most private room in the house, the bathroom. The guy clarified that I was all alone in a room, then wanted me to take off my pants and masturbate while I was on the phone with him. I kept telling him that I didn't want that, and then he went into details about how he was going to kill my nieces and nephews if I did not comply with his wishes. I felt dirty, ashamed, and was truly terrified. And honestly, I didn't know what to do. But rather than masturbating on the phone with a sicko, like he wanted me to, I sat on the toilet and shit myself, and told him I was complying. It was when he wanted me to insert random items into myself that I ran back out to the living room, threw the phone at my sister, and told her to talk to him. When she picked up the phone, he had already hung up. My sister immediately called the police and helped me file a police report. Afterwards, I just sat there and cried for a while. My friends stayed the night to make sure I was okay. We got our phone number changed within a week, but before we could get it changed, the pervert called me one more time. He got to talk to my sister that time, who threatened to blow his head off with a shotgun, and if he thought she was bluffing, he would come over and see it in her hands before he died. I still have no idea who that guy was, or how he got our phone number, because at the time, I didn't even know our phone number, because I only used my cell phone. I have been receiving creepy phone calls all week. This started last Friday and has been going on for the past week. I am part of a church Facebook where you post your needs, and people will fulfill if they can. Or you post something you have to offer, and people will reply if they need it. Take a penny, leave a penny style. Someone posted on the Facebook that they needed an item that I happened to have, so I replied, stating that I had one they could have. They sent me a PM, and we started arranging for pickup. The guy then told me he had posted for a friend, and it was his friend who would be taking it. We had to change pickup days because of some schedule conflicts, so he said a different friend would be picking up because that's who's available to pick up that day. He asked for my phone number so they could let us know when they were on their way. I don't know if it's a crazy coincidence or not, but within 1 hour of giving my phone number, I got the first phone call. My phone rang from a restricted number, which I normally ignore, but for some reason I answered. There was a man on the line talking in a low, deep, slow voice. "You call for the service?" "Oh no, I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong number." "No, I don't. You need the massage and a giant cock." No." Then he hung up. At that point, I kinda just laughed, thinking it was just some teenage boy prank calling or something. But the more I thought about it, the more I was a little bothered by it. There was no giggling, no laughing, no amusement at all in the man's voice. Not only that, but I am completely unlisted, so my phone number isn't available anywhere. I shrugged it off and continued on with my weekend. I somewhat forgot about the instance until on Tuesday, a blocked number called me twice. I didn't answer either time, and I immediately got nervous and remembered the call on Friday when I saw the blocked number. On Wednesday, the blocked number called me again, and this time I answered thinking it was someone from work. And it was the creepy guy again. This time he got straight to the point. I answered, "Hello," and he replied, "I'm gonna fuck you in your pussy." I asked him how he got my number and he hung up. It was definitely the same voice from the call on Friday. I remember that the first call came within an hour of giving out my phone number to the guy on Facebook, and immediately got creeped out because I also gave that person my address so they could pick up the item. About 20 minutes after that phone call, my phone rings again with a blocked number, but I didn't answer again. I decided at this point, I want to kind of confront the man on Facebook. I'd given my number and address out in kindness in the midst of giving him an expensive item I happen to have an extra of, and almost immediately after doing so, I'm getting these obscene calls? So I write him on Facebook, explaining that I've been getting these calls, and asking if he shared my number with anyone. He wrote back apologizing, saying he was sorry I had to go through this, and said he gave my number to the two guys. The first one who was supposed to pick up, Jose, and then to the second one, who ended up picking up because of the reschedule, Mike. He gave me their names and phone numbers, and asked that I please let him know if I find out they are behind it. My husband and I decided at this point that I need to download a call tracking app. I found one that would unblock blocked numbers, so I got to try to use it the next time they call. They didn't call at all yesterday, but just about an hour ago, I get another call from them, and unfortunately, the app doesn't work. It just shows up, 999, 999, 9999. I answer, and the conversation goes along the lines of, "Who is this?" "No, who is this?" "You know who I am." "No, I don't. Stop calling me. But I want to taste your pussy. Let me drink it." "How do you get my number?" "Don't you want me to lick your pussy?" "No, I want you to stop fucking calling me." "Ah, who is this? Is this Jose or Mike?" "Is this Michelle?" "No, my name is not Michelle. If you're trying to reach a Michelle, you're calling the wrong person." "You know who I am." "How the hell did you get my number?" Then he hangs up. At this point, I don't really know what to do. I keep telling myself it's just some kind of idiot prank calling me, and they keep calling back because they got an answer, but in my gut I know I know it's not like this. I don't feel it is. There was no amusement in his voice at all, no laughing, nothing, just a slow, low, deep voice. The tracker didn't work, and he didn't respond at all when I gave the names of the person from Facebook had given me. If it is the guy from the Facebook, they would also know where I live. And that terrifies me. Not only for my own safety, but I also have 2 kids. I have small kids I'm responsible for. Part of me feels like it might not be them. But if it's not, it's an insane coincidence that the call started the same day I gave him my number. For the first time ever, I'm asking Reddit for advice. What should I do?